Hi, everyone. We have a Dr. Arundhati here. Dr. Arundhati is a scientist and academic coordinator at Wildlife Conservation Society, India. So her research interests include mostly landscape ecology. She extensively used GIS and remote sensing technology to understand habitat change, plant evolution, and related topics. So, but one important thing is GIS is also an effective and important tool to understand disease outbreak, mapping pathogens, occurrence and spillover and distribution. So we thought having Arundhati here would be a great thing, and we can actually learn some of the basics of GIS and the tools we use, and also how we can use GIS techniques to understand diseases or pathogen distribution. Yeah. Thank you so much, Arundhati. Over to you. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Ansil. So I'm sorry I could not join you all last week, and I'm coming in here today. I know you've been here for a while and had many interesting talks. So what would be really nice is if we can do a round of introductions, and if you can just tell me like what you're working on, and if you've used some GIS before, and if you've used GIS and remote sensing, what you've used it for, and sort of how much of it you know. So I know how much to go in depth or not with this talk. Shall we start the top?
Yeah, quickly we can introduce ourselves. Yeah, basically to do bullet point.
I'm Tippesamy from Coimbatore University. We are working from Coimbatore University. We are working on KFD epidemiology.
Okay.
And now we are focusing more on diagnosis.
I see. And have you used GIS in your
Excuse
work?
me?
Have you used some GIS in your work?
No, only that.
Okay.
I'm Amod from Coimbatore University. I work with him.
Okay.
Even I work under the KFD group, and I'm not much into this epidemiology, but I work on the protein-protein interactions. So I haven't heard anything about GIS. So this is completely new to me.
Okay. Hello, I'm Dr. C. Arukiraj from Chennai.
Okay.
I'm working in the ICMR funded project at the private organization in which we are dealing about the how the mosquitoes getting adapted towards the climate change, including the temperature and salinity. Right now I was collecting the data, something regarding the incidence rates. And I was trying to correlate with how the incidence rate impacted by the climate change, like the temperature and the humidity. So we were trying, but I'm not that much of the knowledge about the GIS.
Okay, sure.
Hi, my name is Yashwant and I am a PhD student in CCMB.
Okay.
So my work's on chytridiomycosis in amphibians of India.
Okay.
So it's a fungal disease which causes the fungus. So in future I'm planning to see the distribution to use the QS.
Right.
Till now I don't have any experience on that.
Sure.
Hi, my name is Aishanya. I work as a research consultant with a wildlife conservation organization, and our work is mostly to do with mammal populations in Northeast India. So we do use some GIS for our work. So so some of my colleagues, they have developed LULC maps for our work in the Northeast, and basically my work tends to use those maps and do some basic zonal selection, zonal statistics kind of stuff.
And you've done this in what platform?
QGIS.
QGIS.
Yeah.
Great.
Hello, ma'am. I'm Abhay Mahesh Badkar. I'm pursuing integrated masters in molecular biology from Eurajas College, Mysore.
Sure.
I have not worked with GIS as of now.
Hi, I'm Arjun. I have also worked with Aishanya in the Northeast landscape on similar projects, and also have used digital elevation models as well to come up with like different variables. And used it for mostly to do NDVI calculation and stuff. And right now I'm working on land use change and looking at how communities differ. So GIS is definitely a part of the work. So
nice.
Hi, I'm Jyotsna. I have worked with Google Earth Engine, not QIGIS, but directly with Google Earth Engine to analyze rainfall and vegetation patterns, seasonal patterns in them. But QGIS is new for me.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Nandini. I've just finished my undergraduate degree in botany and zoology, and I've heard about QGIS but never used it before.
Hello, I'm Pawan. So I'm working on, we are trying to build a model using plant pollen network to study about the host ships of pathogens. So I have just started learning QGIS.
Okay.
Hello, myself Namrata. I'm PhD student in TICS. I'm working under Dr. Farah, and we are looking for the population genomics of malaria vector in Indian subcontinent, how the genetic diversity differs in mainland and island, and I have used some mapping tools in R platform.
Okay. In R. Okay. Great.
Hello, I'm Krishna Dhadke. I'm part-time student of Symbiosis International University, Pune. And I'm working on yellow fever vaccine. Never heard of GIS.
So hi, I'm Deepa. So I'm a PhD student who is working under Dr. Farah. So we used to work on mosquito larval ecology across different landscape gradients. So we use GIS for mapping the breeding sources of different larval mosquito species. And also I use our platform for that. And we also use spatial analysis for incident rates for dengue incidences. And for that we use Google Earth and then Geoda, Lisa, every software we'll be using for that. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Aishwarya. I work at A3. I'm into zoonotic disease research. I've used a little bit of GIS in the past, but not really right now.
Okay, which platform?
QGIS. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Prashant. I'm from Coimbatore University. I'm part of that group, KFD group. I'm doing my work as an JRF on monoclonal antibodies on KFD. So this is I'm actually new to this GIS tools, right? Actually.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Konika. So I have completed my undergraduation and right now I'm going to go for masters. So I have had an opportunity to intern at IISc and IBAB. I have not worked with GIS still.
Hi, I'm Gayatri. I'm a PhD student at ICTS Tirupati. I'll be working on avian malaria across peninsular India. Now I have no experience in GIS.
Hi, my name is Sri Lakshmi. I'm a PhD student with Dr. Shivaranjani at TICS. So I'm working on air surveillance study to understand the transmission rate in different environment issues. I don't have worked with GIS. I'm very new to this.
Yeah, my name is Srilak. I work for this organization called One Health Trust. Okay. I've just used ArcMaps to create maps earlier and nothing more. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Adish. I work on epidemiological models and some analysis. So I've used QGIS for exploratory data analysis and some plotting. I also use Python.
Sorry, exploring what?
And some plotting of maps.
Before that you said you were exploring?
Some exploratory data analysis of some epidemiological and entomological data. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Alex and I'm a JRF at Ashoka University. So I'm working on a project to study forest dynamics at Himachal Pradesh. So I'm a beginner in QGIS. I have just used QGIS to visualize the data points from which we have collected our samples. And I also just done georeferencing of maps. Okay. That's it.
Hi, I'm Mrinal. I am from IMSC Chennai. I'm working in data science problem. So I don't have any knowledge in GIS. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Kanika Rawat. I'm a PhD student with Dr. Kavita Ishwaran at IISc. Okay. I study Aedes aegypti mosquito, behavioral ecology and evolution using lab-based controlled experiments. I have not used GIS before.
Hi, I'm Zeba. I am from ICTS Tirupati. I'm a project assistant there. I currently work on Himalayan brown bears, but I have used QGIS to build species distribution models during my master's thesis.
Sure. Okay, great. Since there are quite a number of you who have not sort of experienced GIS before, I will be sort of talking to you all at a very base, starting from the basics. And those of you who have some experience, please bear with me. But this might be useful revision for you all because I will be covering some very core basic concepts on how on spatial use of data in a spatial manner. And I'm sure a lot of you have actually interacted with this in school, but what happens is that many of us forget these basics. And what was nice, what emerged from this round of introductions is also a sense of how the variation and how GIS can be used in different ways: mapping, exploratory analysis, looking at climate trends. That was nice to hear the variety of ways in which it's already being used by this group. So what is GIS? It stands for Geographic Information Systems. It's constituted by a number of different things. You have people who are specially trained as GIS technicians or analysts who use specific softwares and data sets. These data sets are generally very large and complicated. They use these to do analyses at different scales. So a lot of the time, people associate GIS with this very large scale analysis, like global or continent-wise, but that's not true. Actually, GIS can be used at a very small spatial scale as well, like at the level of an urban settlement or a mosaic of agriculture, forest, and other human use. Okay, so the nice thing about GIS is that you can choose which scale that you are going to ask your question at. Of course, there is the side of GIS where people use it to map, to communicate results of research as well. It's a very powerful tool in terms of doing that. And at the technical end of it, you have remote sensors. So there are constellations of satellites that many countries have invested in. NASA, as you know, then the EU, India, ISRO is one of the leaders, Japan. And these satellites are usually the main source of information that goes into a GIS. And then you have a set of specialized software. So what's happened in the last 20 years is that GIS has now become democratized. When I first started out, it was done by very specialized people in very specialized labs that were housed in these big universities that had the resources to invest in big data frames, purchase large data sets for covering, continents or global. But now with Google Earth Engine, as some of you are aware of, you can access this data sitting anywhere with a good internet connection. All the data now sits on in the cloud, sorry. So it's been a huge change, this merging of GIS with information technology. And the sort of the trajectory, if you look at it, of how GIS has exploded in terms of accessibility and application, it pretty much mirrors the Keeling curve for CO2 increase in the atmosphere. So just so that you know, you're doing GIS in a very exciting time for the field, both GIS and remote sensing together. So this is just to show you that geotechnology is now, on par with nanotechnology and biotechnology, and has been considered for a while one of these 3 mega technologies for the 21st century, which promises to forever change how we conceptualize, utilize, and visualize spatial relationships for research and commercial applications. So you have basically this triad of the global positioning system, the constellation of remote sensing satellites, and then you have the interface through which these two come together, which is the GIS, okay? And you can ask these questions of where is what, anywhere on the Earth's surface. So a lot of GIS involves descriptive mapping, visualization of patterns. As you know, that is an important step, especially in disease ecology, to understand relationships, right? So descriptive mapping plays a very important role in GIS, and it involves the precise placement of physical features on the Earth's surface. But then from that, we can also look at building models, okay? So involving analysis of spatial relationships and patterns. So we can go to the next level of questions of asking why and so what? What does this mean next? So you can see that it is a very powerful tool. So just coming, like I said, these are very basic concepts that I'm going to cover now, which you probably covered in school, but I need to revisit them before we go into GIS. So most of you, when you think of the Earth, you know, we visualize something like this, right? This sort of very pretty round blue marble. But what is actually the shape of the Earth? Anybody want to? Yeah.
Circle with flattened poles, like an orange.
So you got it, but it's not quite a circle because it is flattened at the poles, as you said. So you have this situation, it's not a perfect sphere. The equatorial diameter is greater than the polar diameter, okay? So the shape of the Earth is actually an oblate spheroid or it's ellipsoidal, okay? But really, I mean, is that what it is? So this is actually more like what the Earth looks like. It's not a perfect oblate spheroid or an ellipse, right? Anybody disagree? Flat, okay. No need for all this complicated. We could just go straight into using a GIS. So yes, it is complicated. The Himalayas protrude while the Netherlands dent. So it's more like a lumpy ellipsoidal, or the term for that is an irregular geoid. So here we have this problem where we have a very irregular geoid, and we try to now bring that, because everything we do is in two-dimensional space, right? So how does this process happen? Okay, how do we go from that to 2D maps? So the first step that we have to undertake is something called georeferencing. And this involves a process by which real-world features must be referenced to a regular shape that can be mathematically described, okay? So that would be a spheroid or an ellipsoid, not a circle, okay? And sometimes what people do is they fit an ellipsoid to only a part of the Earth's surface because they're not interested in studying something at a global scale. They just want to look at something more regional. So they will fit an ellipsoid to only a part of the Earth's surface. And then that is called what's known as a reference ellipsoid. So an example of that would be Everest 1956. So what does that mean? This naming system is, so the name corresponds to the region of the Earth's surface that it matches. So in this case, this was built for mapping areas around Everest. And 1956 is the date, the year in which that ellipsoid was defined, that reference ellipsoid was defined. Okay, so if you see stuff like this in a GIS, you will understand, okay, this is what it means, right? It'll tell you, okay, this data is georeferenced using this ellipsoid. So you'll know, okay, this was the place that it's used for, and this is the date in which it was defined, right? Any questions? Or, so this is one approach if you're not interested in doing something at the global scale. But if you do need something at a global scale, another way of doing it is to define an ellipsoid with the closest approximation to the shape of the Earth. So how many of you have heard of World Geodetic System, WGS for short? Whoever's used GIS, right? You know how central it is to everything that we do, right? So what does WGS 84 stand for? If I say I'm using WGS 84, what am I saying? It means I am using an ellipsoid which most closely matches the shape of the entire Earth. This is the World Geodetic System ellipsoid, which is defined by one of the authorities that sort of give this nomenclature. And this is, by the way, the one that's used by all your GPS systems, all your global positioning satellite systems. And 84 is the year in which it was last defined. So every now and then they meet and they redefine the mathematical parameters based on things like tectonic shifts and so on. And when they do revise it, then you have a new ellipsoid, but then the year changes. So right now we are all using WGS 84. Any doubts? Yeah. So this is just to show you diagrammatically, the black line says the Earth's surface. The blue line is an Earth-centered datum, which means the measurements are taken based on the center of the Earth so that you can approximate the entire globe, the shape of the entire globe with that ellipsoid. However, when you have a local datum, for instance, here this is the North American datum 1927, you can see that it more closely matches one part of the Earth's surface, okay? But in other areas it's off. So that's a regional or reference ellipsoid, yeah? And usually with those, the center of the ellipsoid is off, depending on how well it matches, yeah? So these are just mathematical parameters by which ellipsoids are defined. You have a semi-major axis. So I've just given the values for WGS 84 under in brackets. You have a semi-minor axis. You have a parameter that measures the flattening of the shape and the eccentricity. So very often when you look at the metadata of a GIS layer, you'll see these numbers, you'll see these parameters. So I just want you to understand what you're looking at. Okay? It's the mathematical definition of the reference ellipsoid. Okay, so now we come to this concept of a datum, which is endlessly confusing. So in a GIS, the datum forms the foundation of the spatial referencing system. What do we mean by the datum? It is an ellipsoid that approximates the shape of the Earth. It defines the position of the ellipsoid relative to the center of the Earth, okay? So it defines the shape of the ellipsoid. It defines where the ellipsoid sits relative to the center of the Earth, okay? And the size and the orientation of the ellipsoid with regard to the Earth's surface, okay? All of this information together is what's called the datum, okay? It's not just a mathematical definition of any ellipsoid. It also tells you how that ellipsoid is fitted onto the Earth, okay? So it's a very important piece of information because it provides a reference or origin based on which other measurements are then made, okay? And when you change a datum in a GIS, what you're essentially doing is rotating this sphere on one axis or another, okay? Any doubts about datum and changing datums and what that means in a GIS? Okay. So WGS 84, coming back to that, is a datum, yeah? Okay, so we've now got a way of referencing the surface of the Earth in 3 dimensions. What else do we need now to move forward, to start trying to locate ourselves on specific points on that mathematical surface? We need a coordinate system, right? A grid. So, of course, most grids will have these meridians, which are in lat-long terms the lines of longitude, and then parallels, which are analogous to the lines of latitude. Okay, and with that you build this reticular network, which has a point of origin, which is defined. Okay, so the point of origin is where the prime meridian meets the prime parallel, which in our case is the equator. So GCS uses a 3D spherical surface to define locations on the Earth. But be very careful, because a lot of people confuse datum with a GCS. And you see that they're 2 very different things. Do you agree? Yeah. So sometimes there's a lot of confusion out there as to what the datum actually is. So I want everybody to be really clear about the difference between a datum and a geographic coordinate system. Yeah? Okay? So a datum is actually a part, a subset of the coordinate system, right? Any doubts? This is really important, because this is where a lot of confusion comes up in a GIS context. Yeah, I have some examples a little later on. I will show some. So what a GCS also includes an angular unit of measurement, a prime meridian, and a datum based on a spheroid. Okay, clear? So example is your lat-long. And all of you are very familiar with lat-long, so I'm just going to rush through this. You have lines of longitude, which are your x coordinates. You have latitudes, parallels, which are y coordinates that never meet each other. The longitudes merge at the poles. Unit of measurement is in degrees, yeah? And you range in longitude from 180, positive 180 to minus 180, and from latitude from positive 90 degrees to negative 90 degrees. Okay, now one thing to remember with lat-long is that a unit distance is not equal to, at one parallel, is not equal to a unit distance at another parallel, okay? And that's because of the way this system is defined, the grid is defined, okay? But only at the equator, the north-south and east-west distances are nearly equal, yeah? So this is another very important thing to keep in mind when you're dealing in lat-long systems. Okay, so coming back to where we were, step 1 was to take that 3D surface and locate yourself on it somehow, or locate a feature on it, right? Any questions about that? That's called georeferencing. Yeah, okay. So we fit an ellipsoid to only part of the Earth's surface. That's a reference ellipsoid, or we define an ellipsoid with the closest approximation to the shape of the Earth, which is, for example, is WGS84. Now we have to go from 3 dimensions to 2 dimensions, right? How does that happen? So that process is called projection. And those of you who've dealt with GIS have probably heard this term a lot. So you have this area on a 3D surface and you want to bring it onto a 2D surface. So what is map projection? It's an approach to transform a curved surface to a flat surface. And it can be accomplished in 2 major ways. One, by doing a direct geometric projection using a light source, or by using a mathematically derived transformation. Now, what I mean by geometric projection using a light source is you can imagine that there is a light at the center of that model of the Earth, the globe, which has a grid on it, right? Now, when we project that, we get onto a surface That would be a curved, some kind of like non-flat surface. And then we flatten out that surface, okay? That process is a geometric way of projecting, okay? Very broadly. Or you can do this mathematically through a series of formulas that convert the location of points on a curved surface to locations on a flat plane. Yeah, so that's essentially what the mathematical approach does. Yeah, so you have all that area, this entire area that then has to fit onto this projected plane. Okay. So what happens is you are trying to represent a larger area of the Earth's surface in a smaller flat area. Okay. So there are different ways of doing this. There are three major types of approaches to projection. The most commonly used surface are cylinders, cones, and of course planes. A plane is already flat, but cylinders or cones have to be transformed into a flat surface. Now, the main thing to remember here is this entire process of going from 3D to 2D is going to introduce a lot of error. There is going to be distortion. There is no other way around it. There will be distortion, okay? So just an example of how planar projections are done, they're also called azimuthal projections. You project map data onto a flat surface that can touch the globe tangentially, either at the poles or at the equator or at one of the lines parallels. Okay? By parallel, I mean a line of latitude, for example. But you can see the point that it's touching, it's tangential to the surface. Now that point where it is tangential to specifies the aspect of the projection and the focus of the projection. And the focus is identified by this central longitude and a central latitude, okay? Because it's a point. You need an X and a Y, okay? And so these are the different possible aspects, polar, equatorial, and oblique, okay? In terms of planar projections. Now, it's very unlikely that you will probably encounter planar projections in your work because these, unless they're used a lot for polar regions. So if you do end up working North Pole, South Pole, you will probably be dealing with a planar projection system. Then you have something called conical projections. This, in the simplest form, the cone is sort of placed over the surface of the mathematical representation of the Earth. And the place where the parallel at which it is tangential is called the standard parallel, okay? And you have this standard parallel, and then you have a central meridian. The central meridian is defined as the line of longitude that is opposite, directly opposite from where you're cutting the conical surface open to flatten it out. That is the central meridian in the conical projection, okay? Now, the thing to remember with conical projections is the further you get from the standard parallel, the more the distortion increases. So, in a conical distortion on your map, yeah? So, one reason why you see these conical projection maps with the top missing is because at that point is where the distortion is a lot. So just cut off the top of the cone, okay? So you don't use the polar region of the projected data. So this is a very simple instance of a conic projection. This is the most complex case where you fit multiple cones mathematically. Each cone is tangential to every degree of latitude, okay? It's called polyconic. And this is what it looks like, yeah, when you flatten it out. Any doubts? So where would we need conical projections? They're usually used for mid-latitude zones which have a very wide east-west, they're wide, rather than long. So North America is a good example of where a conical projection would be quite useful. Yeah, so you can see that the projection shows shape fairly accurately, but it tends to distort land masses at the edge of the map. Yeah. Okay, so that's conical. Next shape is cylindrical, right? So instead of the cone, we can wrap a cylinder around the mathematical model of the Earth, and we can do this in these different ways. We can do it, this one here is a normal projection. This is called transverse cylindrical. This is oblique. And again, you can have it tangent to one standard parallel, or you can have it to more than one, yeah? And remember, wherever it touches a standard parallel is where the distortion is the least, okay? Yeah. So this is often used to map the entire globe, this kind of projection, yeah? And one of the advantages is that you get the lines, the meridians and the parallels are at a 90-degree grid to each other with a cylindrical projection, okay? So it tends to distort again near the poles, near the tops of the map. But it does, one advantage of this is that it maintains true direction. So it's very useful for navigation, this kind of projection, okay? So here you can see the amount of distortion. The island of Greenland is coming up as big as entire South America and even Africa, where there's huge size difference here. So just keep in mind that this is the level of distortion in these projected maps. So when we do GIS, we're using also a 2D surface, right? Your information, your spatial information, which is actually in 3 dimensions, you're viewing it on a flat screen. So what's happening when you bring in, say, an unprojected, I told you what projection is. So when we bring in an unprojected GIS layer, what is your QGIS actually doing? Any guesses? So what it's doing is very simple, and that's called a Platt-Curry projection. I don't know how that's pronounced, but it's essentially mapping your latitude and your longitude to your X and your Y, okay? So again, where is the distortion happening? Can you see? Yeah. So the areas at the top are getting squashed because of that, yeah? So anytime, what I just want you to remember here is not, see, you can look all of this up. It's not something that you need to memorize, but what you need to remember is that there is distortion when you talk about projections, and you need to understand what projection is bringing in what distortion, and therefore which projection is the best for the question that you're asking. Yeah, so that. There are 3 ways in which projections distort things. So the distances get distorted in all projections, okay? No projection maintains true distance. Directionality is possible to preserve in some projections. Like I mentioned, the cylindrical can preserve true direction. Shape can also be maintained, especially smaller shapes. In some projections, those projections that maintain shape are called conformal projections. Area can also be preserved, in relative area can be preserved in some projections. Those are called equal area projections. But just remember that no projection can be both conformal and equal area. So no projection will give you correct relative area and correct shape, okay? That's not possible. So here are some examples of commonly used projections. You might have heard of the Mercator. I already mentioned it. This is very useful for navigation, especially because it maintains ocean distances relative to each other across the oceans. So for especially marine navigation, this is very useful, and it preserves direction. Then you have the mole-wide projection. This is equal area, but there is again some distortion with the shape. Yeah. And then you have Robinson, which is commonly used for mapping global, to produce global maps. And this is conformal, which means it maintains shape relative, but then area gets distorted, okay? So how do you choose the right projection? Any distortion introduced by projection will be smallest near the standard points or the curves where the projection surface touches the Earth. When you're using non-global maps, try and use projections that minimize distortion in your region of interest. We talked about regions elongated east-west. They're commonly represented by conic projections. The more lines of latitude or parallels that the conic projection touches, the better. So regions elongated north-south, like India, are commonly represented by transverse cylindrical projections touching along the meridians, the lines of longitude. Yeah. And then you have planar projections, which are, like I said, usually useful for polar regions. So this is UTM. UTM is what we commonly use. UTM stands for Universal Transverse Mercator Projection. It's a cylindrical projection. Again, maintains true distance, maintains to some extent it's conformal. These are the UTM zones. So the Earth, the map surface is divided into different zones. What I want to draw your attention to is that India is actually covered in 5 or 6 UTM zones. Okay, so there are multiple UTM zones. They are all in the northern hemisphere. So when you're working inside the country and using UTM, you have to first ask which zone is my geographic area of interest in, okay? Because from the northeast to Gujarat, you're covering about 5 or 6 UTM zones. So other information that may be of use, Indian topo sheets, if it's very, very coarse scale, like 1:1 million scale, they use Lambert's conformal conic projection. It's a conical projection. For the finer scale maps, which are 1:250,000 topo sheets and 1:50,000 topo sheets, and then you have 1:25,000 topo sheets, those are in the polyconic projection. Yeah. And if you're doing area-based analysis, it's always good to use UTM because it possesses true direction and has conformality to a degree. And you can change projection and datum independently. Okay, so this is another important thing to keep in mind. Yeah, you can use one projection system with a different datum. Any questions? Yeah. So when we say what is a spatial reference system, it's a combination of all of these things. Yeah, it should have a definition of an ellipsoid, a datum using that ellipsoid. And what is the datum bringing in addition to the ellipsoid? The orientation of the ellipsoid, right? And either a geographic coordinate system, which is 3D, or a projected coordinate system, which is 2D. You will encounter, when you get into GIS, you will encounter a lot of these terms all the time. What's the projection? Is it geographic projection? So I really, at the end of this, want you to know what the difference is between when somebody says my data is in WGS 84, what is that? Is it projected data? It's unprojected data because WGS 84 is a datum with usually lat long in QGIS, and that is unprojected data. Okay? It's usually just said it's in a geographic coordinate system. But then somebody will say, okay, I need to, look at elevation. I need to look at difference in elevation between 2 points and so on. So then what would we need to do? Say I give you a data set that's in WGS 84, and you need to extract elevation information. What units do we measure elevation in? Anybody? Meters, right? Meters above sea level, right? So then you need to think of a projected coordinate system that works in meters. And that is UTM. Yeah?
Yeah.
So these things need to be defined even before doing the map or like whatever analysis that you're doing, or can you do it later on as well, like after the
Both.
analysis?
So if you are creating a GIS layer from scratch, say you're digitizing something like roads, you have a topo sheet, you have to georeference the topo sheet, which means you have to give it some lat-long information so that the GIS knows where on earth you're dealing with. And then you bring in some information from the topo sheet, like you're digitizing roads. So when you create that layer, and I want all of you to really remember this, when you create a GIS layer, you have to, absolutely have to create what's called metadata. And that metadata tells anybody, including yourself 6 months ahead, where you've forgotten completely what you did, how you derive that layer, what the geographic coordinate system that layer is defined in, okay? All this information has to go in a metadata file. I was going to get to that later, but since this is a very important question. So when you're generating a GIS layer, you generate the metadata. You are defining the spatial reference system, right? And then you have to give that information in the metadata file. But when somebody is giving you a GIS layer or you are downloading it from another source, always make sure you have the metadata file, or you know somewhere with the documentation what spatial reference system has been used to create that layer. Yeah? Then you can change it. And that is called reprojection or transformation.
If I have some lat-long points, and if I don't know which project or what's the system that they used or anything, up to what decimal points I can rely on these data set of lat-longs, and what will be the uncertainty in the...
One way of figuring that out is to try and overlay it with a known data set. So say you have a topo sheet where you know what the georeferencing of that topo sheet is. So you can try and overlay it, and that if it overlays properly, then you can figure out, okay, this is in lat-long, but it's WGS 84. See, you already know it's in lat-long, right? But you don't know what the datum is. If there's a shift between your topo sheet, which you know is in WGS 84, and this layer of lat-long, then they've probably used a different datum to define that.
Topo sheet corresponding to the region where the lat-long was taken.
You guys have seen topo sheets? Has everybody seen a topo sheet from the Survey of India? Okay. I'm sorry, I should have bought one. So these are maps created by the Survey of India. They're, by the way, extremely important sources of information on any geographic feature within the Indian subcontinent, yeah? So you can go to the Survey of India website. There is a whole series of maps which are called open series maps, which anybody can download, yeah? And these maps are defined at different spatial scales. I was going to get into maps and spatial scale, but there's just not enough time. So maybe if you all, we can, correspond later, and if you all have questions on this, on how to get these maps and what they mean and what the map scale means, we can, I don't know, maybe do it later over email or a small discussion later. But the Survey of India topo sheets are an extremely important source of information for any spatial features. They have everything from roads to railways to settlements, individual houses, forest areas, topography, of course, the topo sheets. So topography is the base of the map, forms the basis of the map. Yeah? Yeah, sorry.
I'm curious why you need to, so for example, if you're doing elevation, why does your GIS also have to be in the same units? It doesn't, because for example, I'm using rasters or even if I'm using polygons, I have multiple polygons for different, I'm using isoclines or something of that sort. I don't see why the GIS has to be in the same scale. So I don't know why it has to be in meters or whatever it is. And it's especially kind of confusing to me because I guess once you start projecting things, then things become a little more complicated. So I'm just curious why it has to be in the same scale.
So are you talking about scale or projection? It has to be in the same scale so that it can overlay with other information.
No. So you said that we measure elevation in meters.
Yeah.
So your GIS
the
has to be in
scale
meters.
of measurement. Yes.
Yeah. So why does the GIS have to be in meters? You can have a GIS in kilometers.
It's just a question of interpretability. When you do an analysis and you're measuring elevation in some other unit, it becomes a little difficult to interpret. It's a lot more intuitive to interpret elevation information in terms of meters above sea level, because that's how its standard measurement is.
Oh no, I'm not questioning that. I'm asking why the GIS has to be in meters, because
it doesn't have to be. It can be in anything else. It can be in a different, like it can be in lat long, it can be in degrees. It can be in degrees. It doesn't have to be. I'm just saying that if I was doing an analysis using elevation as one of my input layers, and I was using a lat long unit for elevation, that would not be easily interpretable, right? Or comparable, because a lot of people, when they work with elevation, work in meters.
So I think I'm completely lost now. So how are you working with elevation in GIS? I mean, you either have to put it into a raster, or you have to put it into like multiple polygons or something of that sort, right? So I guess I agree that the elevation itself has to be in meters. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So each grid is, you're going to say that this grid is X meters or whatever it is above sea level. But my question is, why does the raster grid have to be in meters?
It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have. I'm sorry if I came across as saying that it has to be in meters. I was just trying to give an example of when you use a projection system, the units, you have to think about the units of the projection system. And the reason that some people choose certain projection systems for doing certain types of analysis is because, like in the case of UTM, the units are in meters. So for area, for elevation, that just makes more sense. You can have it in any projection system. It doesn't have to be meters. Okay, so I have another set of slides on types of data. Do you guys want to take a short break and come back, or shall I just go through these now? And we have a hands-on session also with QGIS if we have time. So can I start? Yeah. So now I'm just going to talk to you about the different types of data formats in a GIS. So how does a GIS store spatial data? So there are different types of geometries that can be stored: points, lines, and areas. Okay. So in terms of what happens in a GIS, a point is a pair of XY coordinates. It's the simplest geometric unit. A vector is a set of points with directionality. Okay, so it's an ordered list of points that is stored in the GIS. And of course, an area or a polygon is a closed, enclosed space defined by a line, which is an ordered set of points. Okay, so everything builds on the simplest unit, which is a pair of XY coordinates. So when we hear the term vector in a GIS context, you're either talking about a point, a line, or a polygon. Okay, these are all vectors. This is a vector data format. So vectors are discrete variables which are defined only at specific locations in space. Okay, and points, building on points, you have lines, and then you have polygons, and these require topology, which means a set of rules that define the relationships between the different the different spatial units. Okay, so just to remember, you have a set of discrete units in space, and you have a set of rules that define how those units are connected to each other. Okay, in a vector format. The other way that data can be represented in a GIS is called a raster. A raster, in opposition to a vector, is a continuous variable that is defined everywhere over the given extent of the raster. So if I'm confusing you, please let me know. A vector are discrete points. Okay, you can have a polygon here, information about an enclosed area here, and then a little bit away you can have a different polygon. But in between there is no information available. In a raster, it's a continuous data set that is continuously defined over space of a given extent. Okay? And these are basically grids. The units of a raster are grids or cells or pixels. I think most of you are familiar with the raster format because if you've used any kind of image software, that's all rasters, right? So yeah. So you have the real world. Some features in the real world can be depicted as vectors and others can be depicted as rasters. And the difference is that a raster has for this given spatial extent, the raster has a unit value for each of those, every single point in this area. Whereas a vector has something defined here, something defined there, and something defined there. But it's not continuous, yeah? So a vector is a coordinate-based model. It represents geographic data as points, lines, and polygons. A point feature is represented as a single coordinate pair, and a line is a set of ordered points. Yeah, repetition. So then from points, you have arcs or curves, which are one-dimensional, and you have nodes, which define the beginning or the end of a line. And in between the nodes, you have vertices, which are the flex points. Okay, so it tells you how the line is changing direction, the vertices. Okay, so that's just a graphical representation. Any questions on an arc?
Arundhati, just one thing to add. So you understand the difference between raster and vector, right? So the raster is extremely important in certain instances. For example, we know this pathogen emerged from this place, or this disease outbreak happened in one location. So given we have these values, like different climatic or values associated with these grid, it'd be extremely useful to, like, take that further to understand correlates and things like that. Aditi will talk about that. I just wanted to bring up that point here. Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you for tying it back. So after arcs, you have these polygons, or in QGIS, they're now referred to as rings. So another confusing thing in GIS is whatever software that you're using has its own terminology. And the QGIS terminology does not necessarily match the Esri terminology. Esri is the maker of ArcGIS, which is the industry standard commercial software. It's extremely expensive. And they have a different way of defining, or different set of terminology to define vectors compared to QGIS. So in QGIS, a polygon is referred to as a ring. If you're using an ARC platform, those are called polygons, yeah? Don't worry too much, just keep that in mind. It depends on which software you're using. They have different names for things. So a polygon or a ring is an enclosed area. That's very important. It has to be closed with points, lines, and vertices, with the first and the last coordinate pairs or the nodes are the same. So that's how it becomes closed, yeah? Okay, so this is QGIS terminology. You have line strings and linear rings. So QGIS refers to as arc, or what Esri used to call an arc, as a curve, okay? So a curve is simple if it does not pass through the same point twice, okay? And a curve is closed if the start node and the end node are the same. And QGIS calls a simple closed curve a ring or a polygon, yeah? So the figure in C here is what's known as a ring in QGIS, okay, or a polygon. So a little more about polygons. They're planar surfaces defined by one exterior boundary and no or more interior boundaries. So you can have polygons. For example, if you have a polygon representing a pond or a lake, and you have little islands inside the lake or the reservoir, those have to then be defined using another polygon, which defines where the gap or the spatial hole is in the larger polygon, okay? So now I mentioned that there are rules, right, that define the relationships between these geographic features. And with regard to polygons, the rules that define valid polygons are that they are topologically closed. When I use the word topology, I am just talking about the relationship between points, lines, and polygons, right? Topology is just the spatial relationship between two things. Polygons are topologically closed. The boundary of a polygon consists of a set of linear rings that make up its exterior as well as interior boundaries. And no two rings in the boundary cross. And the rings in the boundary of a polygon may intersect at a point, but only as a tangent. Okay, so these are, this is an example of topological rules, okay? So these are a set of rules that define how these features share coincident geometry and the spatial relationships between neighboring features. So this is very important with topology. Even if you transform your data, if you project your data from one projection system to a different projection system, say you go from lat long to UTM, topology never changes, okay? Topology is constant, okay? So the spatial relationships between neighboring features do not change during geographic transformations. But the thing about topology is that it does not invariably exist. It has to be built and maintained, okay? So this is especially important to remember when you are generating a GIS layer from scratch by digitizing features of any kind of map. Okay, so you have to, in some softwares, including QGIS, allow you to define these topological rules. And how you define these topological rules will depend on what you are trying to represent. Okay, so for instance, with a road network, you can have arcs that cross each other or lines that cross each other, right? Because you have roads that intersect. But in another context, you can set a topological rule which says, please produce an error if I have intersecting arcs, especially if you're trying to digitize a bounded polygon area and you want to make sure that there are no arcs that are intersecting. So just to keep in mind that topology is something that is defined to a large extent by you, especially if you are generating a new layer from sort of a hard copy source or something that's scanned. And errors in topology, so very often in QGIS or ArcGIS, you will see that there are these errors. It generates, when you're trying to create a layer, it tells you, okay, there's an error here. These are topological errors. So usually you have to go and clean the layer. So that cleaning process is nothing but fixing the layer to make sure that all the features meet the topological rules, okay? So there's a process of digitizing by which you create a layer. And once you have digitized, you have to clean the layer, which means you have to make sure that none of these topological rules or any errors are taken care of. And there are specific editing tools in these softwares to do that. Okay, so I already talked about nodes marking the beginning and ending of each arc. And arcs that share a node are connected, and polygons are defined by a series of connected arcs. So sometimes an arc that intersects another arc can be split, or you can ask the GIS to recognize it as two separate arcs, you know, where that intersection is happening. And each arc that defines all or part of a polygon records the number of the polygon to its left and to its right. Yeah? So how does the GIS know how that polygon, say you're doing a map, creating a map of forest types from an aerial image, aerial photograph. How does the GIS know that your polygon for deciduous forest is adjacent to a polygon for dry forest? Because of these topological rules, okay? So each arc that defines all or part of a polygon boundary records the number of the polygon that is adjacent on either side, okay? So this information is also stored at the back end in the GIS. And there's a direction of travel, okay? So all this, just to give you a sense of how GIS recognizes this when you're going through that digitizing, this is the information that is going into the software. So these are examples of topological errors. Here you have a vector layer with arcs, maybe roads, and one road has overshot, okay? So here you can define a rule that says this is an error and it should be cleaned. You should have no case where there is it's called a dangle arc in Esri, okay? Again, you may have slivers or gaps, very fine. You have to really zoom in to find some of these. This is an error. It should be a shared boundary, but it's not exactly a shared boundary. So what has to be fixed, that vertex and that vertex have to be at the exact same point in space, yeah? So the reason I'm spending so much time on this is that if you are creating a GIS layer, a vector layer, no analysis can be done using that layer till all this is taken care of. All these topological errors have to be fixed before yeah, go ahead.
Software show us that these errors exist?
Yes. So in most softwares, there will be algorithms that you can run to check for such errors. And again, you may have you could use default topological rules, or you can set rules in many softwares and then run an algorithm that asks the software to check your layer for these errors, things like dangle arcs or sliver polygons, you know, and it will tell you, okay, it will give you the address of each point or vertex where there are errors. And then you have to really go in, like something like this, if it's a small polygon, you really have to zoom in to see, okay, yes, there is a gap there, and then you have to go in and fix that. So a lot of GIS, 90% of GIS is just donkey work, yeah? It's a lot of hard work, yeah. So these are some common file formats. Shapefiles were developed by Esri, the makers of ArcGIS, and that used to be like the main format that was used. The problem with shapefiles, if any of you have dealt with shapefiles, is they come with a constellation of other files, and if you don't have the other files that are associated with the actual shapefile, you cannot open the shapefile in a GIS, okay? So it's clunky. More recently, another format has been developed, which is which addresses this problem of portability, and that's geopackages. .gpkg is the extension. Okay, so GeoPackage is an open standards-based platform, independent, portable, self-describing, compact format for transferring geospatial information. So most of the time, this GeoPackage is probably the easier way to open, to view, to email files to other people, and so on, to share your GIS data. And the backend, it has an SQLite container with OGC is Open Geographic Consortium, on which QGIS is based, encoding standards for storing vector features, tile matrix, which is raster data, and non-spatial attributes of data and extensions. And you can have another advantage with GeoPackages is you can have multiple types of geometries within one file. Okay, so you can store a point layer with polygons layers and arc layers all in the same GeoPackage. Okay, so you have what is called a multi-type geometry. Okay, so those are the formats for vector data sets. Why are vector data sets so powerful? Because all I've been talking about so far has been the actual definition of the feature in space, the geometry. But there's another side to it, which is the attribute data. Okay, so the reason I've said here it's putting the I in GIS, it's the information associated with that feature. So you can have a database table with n number of columns describing any aspect of anything that you're interested associated with that feature. So this makes it very, very powerful, right? So that's in the case of vectors. So you have attributes only for vectors, okay? It's non-spatial information about that geographic feature. It's stored in a table and linked to the feature by a unique identifier, okay? So that's the thing that links the feature to the database. So example, if you have a vector file of rivers or streams, you can attach information about the attributes of the river like name, length, sediment load, pollution level, anything, right? Any kind of information. So the difference here is in a raster, the information is stored in each pixel. Okay, each pixel has a value associated with it, but there is no attribute table in a raster. Okay, so in some ways, rasters store less information, even though they're defined continuously over space. They can store less information than the vector format. And these are interchangeable, I should say. You can convert from a vector to a raster and the other way around. But you need to think about which is a better way of representing the data that you're trying to use and the analysis that you're trying to do, okay? But do you have any questions about how vectors store data associated with geometry and how rasters store data? Yeah.
Just going back to errors, like you showed for vectors, those VAT matrices not overlapping, I mean, dangling arcs and all that. But with raster, do we have errors as well?
Yeah, there are errors, and I'll get to that, but it's there's no geometry as such the way there is with a vector. So the concept of topology really more applies in terms of a vector rather than a raster. Yeah.
If you fill a shapefile with some attribute, then it becomes a raster, like on that top right.
In the earlier slide, I said a shapefile is a vector data format.
And if you fill that data,
you can't store a raster as a shapefile.
Okay. But in QGIS, you combine this shapefile and assign some value to that geometry and fill it with colors, like how you see in the top right.
Are you talking about the raster or the vector? This is a raster. This is a raster representation of a vector up there. So those are the polygons defined as vectors, and this is how they would be represented in a raster.
Okay, got it.
So all that you get in the raster is you can get information that this pixel is land cover type 1, this pixel is land cover type 3, and this pixel is land cover type 2. But there is no data table associated with this Yeah? Yeah, so say you're interested in polygon 804, right? So in a GIS, you can actually go in and highlight that using your cursor. And then if you open the attribute table, it will highlight the associated row with that feature. No, this is a polygon layer.
No, but the number is showing polygon, but land use and area. Okay, now I'm okay.
So, okay, just to be clear, this is a vector at the top. Here is a vector, and this is the attribute table associated with these vector features. Here you have another vector, and you can convert that into a raster, but there is no table here. Here, it just has the information on the identity of that land cover type. Yeah? Any other questions?
The land use. So what does it say? I mean, I did not get that part. The land area is something we can understand. ID is something which is already there. But what is that land use?
No, it's just, this is not a specific, any specific map. It's just a representation to explain how vectors stored information as opposed to rasters. So say you have any land
No,
use.
not rasters, ma'am. In vectors. That I understood.
How
Raster
is land use information stored in the vector? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that will be, see, here in the table.
Okay.
So you have a database table associated with polygon number 1. Okay? Like something like this, not this particular table, but something like this. And one of the columns will have a code or a description of the land use of that polygon. Yeah? Any other? This is an important distinction of raster and vector, how they store information. Okay, so with vectors, now we're only talking about vectors, you can have many different types of attributes in the data table. You can have nominal attributes, which are like, for example, land use categories. Or you can have an ordinal variable. So if something is ordered by small, medium, large, that can also be, anything that you can use in a database can be used. An interval attribute can be used for temperature or date. You can use ratios as fields in the database table. Or you can have cyclic variables like longitude, time, direction, as fields in the database table. Okay, so that's vectors. Any question on vectors? We're clear about how vectors store data, what kind of information can be associated with spatial features in a vector. Yeah. So now we move in a little more detail on rasters. I've talked about this a little bit before, but I just want to make sure that everybody's clear. So rasters, as I said, represent space continuously. So these are examples of different types of rasters you can have. You can have elevation rasters. Based on elevation, you can derive slope rasters, which measure slope at every pixel, a slope value for every pixel, matching the elevation. And you can have land cover, okay, for the same area. Any doubts? Okay, here in this graphic. Okay, so the spatial data model for a raster is defining space as an array of equally sized cells that are arranged in rows and columns. Each cell contains an attribute value. Okay, you can only have a single attribute associated with a raster. So this is the difference, which stores coordinates explicitly. A raster cell locations are contained in the ordering of the matrix. Okay? So this is another big difference in how rasters and vectors store spatial information. Yeah? So in the raster, you have the coordinates. In a vector, you have the coordinates. In a raster, you have a matrix of values, You have a definition in space of where the raster begins. You have the number of rows in the raster, you have the number of columns. All this information is given in the header file, okay? And then you have the actual table. It's a matrix of values. So that is how a raster knows where it is located in space, how much area it covers, and in what resolution it covers that area. The resolution is nothing but the number of rows divided by the number of columns. Yeah? It's a very simple, elegant way of representing spatial data. Usually in a raster, groups of cells that share the same value represent the same type of geographic feature, okay, or response, like we saw in the example of that land cover representation in a raster. Yeah? So this is real world. This is how it would be represented as a vector. And this is how it would be represented as a raster. Here, in these cells, would be no data value, but it would be defined. But here it's not defined, okay? That's the difference. One is continuous, the other is not, yeah? Yeah, so this is just telling you how the raster information is stored. You have a number of rows, number of columns, and then it just, like if you open a raster in a text file, you'll just see numbers arranged like this, yeah? What are these numbers? The attribute, the value of that attribute that that raster is depicting, yeah? And at the header, you will have that XY of where the top right corner of the raster is in space. Then you have the number of rows and the number of columns. So that's all the information that the GIS needs to map the raster, yeah? Okay, so what's so great about rasters? Rasters are amazing, like Ansil was saying. They form the basis of spatial modeling and map analysis, okay? All that, yeah, sorry. Yes, you can. How would you control the grid size? How would I change? Say I want to change the resolution of each pixel from 5 meters to 10 meters. How would I do that?
That UTM you told about.
Yeah, say the information is in UTM projection and the resolution of the grid is 5 meters. But I want to coarsen it out to 10 meters. This is a very common GIS operation. What defines the resolution of the raster?
Projection?
No, the projection is defining where it is in space. It's giving the spatial reference. But the resolution of the raster is defined by what?
It's a simple, I think, maybe mathematical equation we can...
No.
No?
Yeah, what is the pixel size defined by? What is the pixel size defined by? Exactly. It's a matrix. How many rows, how many columns? So if you want to increase the pixel size, what do? Exactly. Yeah. Very, very elegant. Yeah. So, so why are rasters so powerful? First of all, they represent space continuously. You can represent anything in a raster. More importantly, you can stack rasters and run any kind of analysis on them. So say I have a point in space, XY. I can have a raster representing land cover, I can have a raster representing rainfall, I can have a raster representing temperature, I can have a raster representing hydrology, terrain, and I can query each of those rasters based on that point in space. So in the context of this course, say you have a location where a disease has been recorded, a case, an event of a disease being recorded in a point in space. You can get all this contextual information about that point in space through querying stacks of these rasters in a GIS, yeah? Yeah.
Hello. So if we have a pre-existing raster, even if you're changing size of that raster, then we'll have to do some sort of operation on the already existing pixel values, right? Because if you're increasing the pixel size, it's going to cover more area. So
The pixel.
yeah, pixel.
Not the raster.
Not the raster.
So there are two things here with spatial scale. One is the extent, which is the bounding box, the area that you're studying. The second is the grain of the raster, the resolution. Yeah. So yeah.
If you had that raster with values, right? If you want each pixel to be bigger, the boundary stays the same, but the pixel size is enlarging. So you'll have to accommodate the values beside it also.
And you can define, you can tell the GIS how you want to do that. Take an average, take the min, take the max in a window. So you define a moving window. The GIS runs that window or that kernel across the raster, across the matrix, and then assigns, based on whatever operation you ask it to do, assigns the value to the central pixel. Yeah? So. Yeah, so a raster framework provides consistent parceling and deploys a continuous map surface, and this gives you a lot of power in terms of what analysis you can do. Yeah. And also so say you have gaps in your data. So have you heard of the term interpolation? Some of you may have used it also. Yeah. So with rasters, you can actually interpolate missing values. Say you have soil. So I'm going to examples that I know of, which in like ecology would be like you've measured soil in different places, but you don't have soil information for that intervening area. You can use rasters to interpolate, create a continuous surface of soil values, how soil is changing, that soil parameter is changing over space. Okay, so yeah, so these are key concepts with any GIS database. You can have themes. So a theme would be like, vector themes would be like, this is roads, or this is lakes. Those are themes, right? You can have a collection of different themes. And then you can have these rasters, which each raster will correspond to a theme. Yeah. And the main thing to remember in a GIS is you're dealing with fluid scales, because this is a digital environment. You can zoom in, you can zoom out, okay? And that is powerful, but it introduces a lot of problems, which we'll talk about later. And then the third thing, which we talked extensively about in the morning, is this spatial referencing, yeah? So these are the three sort of key concepts in a geographic database. So like I've already mentioned this, one thing you have to really look out for is metadata information. If you're creating a GIS data, you have to create metadata. Otherwise, it's useless. Other people cannot use your information. If you're downloading data, look for the metadata associated with that layer that you're downloading. Metadata describes the content, quality, condition, origin, and other characteristics of the data. How, when, where, by who the data was collected, its projection, scale, resolution, its accuracy, very important, accuracy, and its reliability with regard to some standard, some globally accepted standard. Also documented properties derived from the data source, so the CRS, the projection of the data, who created that data set. Yeah, and there are certain keywords in metadata that can be used. So the source of these standards is FGDC, Federal Geographic Data Committee. I urge you, if you are going to, at some point, create GIS layers, this is a good standard to use when you prepare your metadata associated with the layer that you are creating. Yeah. And in general, when you're using GIS, these are some things to keep in mind. Like any analysis, things can get complicated. You make mistakes. You will have 10 different versions of one file. You need to keep a log of what was created using what, which version was the final version. And believe me, you run something 1 week and then 3 weeks later, it's just completely out of your mind what you did. And if you just go to that folder and see a bunch of different files with the same name, it's very difficult. So that's why keeping a log, especially noting which is the final version of that layer, okay, and all the intermediate files that were produced. So when you're running a GIS analysis, there are a lot of intermediate outputs that feed into the next step of the analysis. You have to keep track of that somewhere, okay? And sometimes for publications, you need documentation on this. You don't want to be sharing the wrong version of the layer at the end with your publication. And always create a metadata, okay? Try only to use data from known sources with associated metadata. It's very dicey to, okay, I can download this layer, that's great, but then I have no idea who created it, how it was created, what projection system it is. Sometimes even that information is not there. Okay, the spatial referencing information is not there. Try to avoid that or using that. Always be very systematic in how you organize things. This will help you later. Okay, so I have a set of slides on error in GIS. Is it okay to run through these now, or shall we switch to the hands-on session? Okay, so what I'll do is maybe talk about, so this is actually an important set of slides because GIS can give you the sense of false precision, which you really need to watch out for. So I do want to talk about this, but I think what we might do right now is get into QGIS. Were you all able to load it on your laptops? Can you just open it up? So I'm using this version 3.34, which according to the QGIS website is the latest long-term release. You should always download the LTR version, the long-term release. That's the most stable. Are you all here? Anybody not here? So you can open an empty project. So QGIS stores collections of information, rasters, vectors, any analysis that you've done in a project. Kind of analogous. How many of you have used R? Okay, a lot of you. So it's kind of analogous to an RStudio project, yeah? A QGIS project. So, and also on that note, so R has these libraries. QGIS has what's called packages, right? So you have the base version, which has a bunch of things that it can do built in. But then if you want something and you can't find that functionality in the base version, you can go to the QGIS list and look for a package, what packages are available, and download that. They're exactly work like R libraries, yeah? Does anybody have a question about that? Because some people may not be familiar with R. So if you've got your QGIS window open, the way you can add a layer, so this is a new project, okay? And in the project, if you go to the project menu, there should be a dialog called properties. If you open that, is there a way that I can take this zoom bar out? Hide floating. Yeah, okay, great. Okay, so general settings, you can fill all this out. You can also define here Yeah, I managed. Thanks, Ansil. So you can define the ellipsoid, the spatial sort of context that you want the project to be in, okay? But if you define a certain spatial context or projection and then you bring in a layer that's in a different projection, what QGIS does is it does a on-the-fly projection.
Ma'am, I think you have shared the wrong map of India. So
I haven't shared a map of India. I've shared
there's a map, world map in this.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. I'll come back to that later, but just to defend myself, I have not shared with you all a map of India, okay? It's a map of the world. And I'll come to that. That's an important point that you raised. Yeah, so just to come back here, you can set all of these parameters for your project here, okay? Which spatial reference system you want to work on, etc. And you can play around with all the other options on the side later. What we'll do now is just bring in some vectors and bring in a raster so you can see in the QGIS environment what they look like and how they're different. Yeah. So you can go here to this icon here, which is to add a layer. So did all of you run through the exercise in the QGIS training manual about the QGIS interface? You're familiar with the interface? Yeah? No. Okay, so you have a bunch of drop-down menus here. And then you can bring in some of these toolbars by going to view toolbars. You have a whole bunch. So what you can turn on and turn off, what shows on these two menu bars up here can be controlled through this, okay? Then you have this panel here, which shows you which layers are brought into the project, okay? And this is the main workspace, your canvas, okay? Down here is very important information. What spatial reference system you're using, okay? Right now it looks like that long. Here is the scale. It's a fluid scale. You zoom in, you zoom out, keep an eye on that, it will change. Okay, the scale is shown as a ratio. Does anybody have a doubt about this scale? Do you understand what it's telling you? Okay. What is the scale right now? It's 1 unit is equal to 16 lakh 4,310 units on the ground. Okay, that's how you interpret that ratio. Yeah. Okay, you can ignore that. This is very important. QGIS has a code, an EPSG code for all projection systems. EPSG, so EPSG stands for European Petroleum something group, which is a consortium that defines these codes. So EPSG 4326 is nothing but lat long WGS 84, okay? If you're using QGIS, just remember EPSG 4326 is lat long WGS 84. Okay? So your project right now is in lat long WGS 84 by default. So now we're going to add a layer. So you go to that icon, go to vector because we want to bring in a vector layer. Click this 3-dot icon here. Bring in countries, okay? Do you all have this file? So these are shape files. This is what I was telling you. To open this 1.shp file, you need to have all these files in the same folder, okay? That's why shape files can be clunky, okay? Have you found this file? Anybody not found it? Okay. .shp is the extension that you need to select. And press open. It'll bring up a whole bunch of information. We don't have time to get into that. Just say add and close, okay? So this is a data set that's freely available from a website called Natural Earth. And it is the boundaries, administrative boundaries of all the countries in the world, okay? Now, when he said you have used the wrong boundary for India, I have not defined this layer. This is a layer defined by a global entity, okay? And most global entities will define India in this manner. However, if you publish anything using the boundary of India that they have shown here, you can be put in jail, okay? So the Survey of India has a defined India boundary, and please only use that boundary and not anything else defined in these global data sources, okay? That's an extremely important thing to keep in mind. And if you are not sure if it's the official boundary, please always put a disclaimer on your map. Something saying to these boundaries are meant to be representative and not actual political entities. Have a disclaimer there, but in general, rule of thumb, do not use anything but the official boundary as defined by the government of India if you are depicting all of the country in one map, okay? So has everybody got this layer? Yeah? Now, can you go into the layer dialog, highlight that, right click, and say open attribute table. Okay, so this is a vector. Because it's a vector, it has this attribute table associated with it. By the way, what kind of vector is this? Is it a point layer? Polygons. It's a polygon layer. So if, okay, say I highlight Afghanistan, okay? I'm curious about Afghanistan. What information can I get? So again, I have not developed this layer, so I cannot explain to you what all of these columns are. But there are alternate names. If you see here in the table, there's population, GDP, census, last census year. Okay, so there's a lot of interesting information in this layer. Region, continent, sub-region, all of that is given, okay? So now I'm interested, here I'm looking at the record corresponding to the Afghanistan polygon, but I don't know where Afghanistan is. So I minimize, if you minimize this table there, it's automatically highlighted the polygon for Afghanistan, yeah? So these are linked. The geometric entity, the polygon, is linked to the record in the database table. How is it linked? Anybody remember? There's a unique identifier. If you open the attribute table, you'll see that. Okay? At the head of the table, there is a column with an ID. Where is that? There will be an ID column somewhere. Usually in a shapefile, it's under FID, okay? There is an ID column. I'm not sure why it's not showing up here, but there will be a column that defines a unique identifier for this polygon, okay? So that's how the link works. Any questions? Yeah. So do you want to now look at a point layer? You can add a point layer. Those were polygons. You can go to this layer, this one called populated places.shp, any underscore 10m underscore populated underscore places, simple shape, open, add. Okay. Yeah, this is cities, urban, I think it's urban areas. So what we should do is you can zoom, you can use the magnifying glass and draw a box around India, okay? So you see there are a lot of points in this geography here, South Asian geography. What would be really helpful is if we could have some labels. So right click, go to properties, Am I losing people? Go to labels. Go down, click that down arrow and choose single labels. And it's already selected name. Just accept the other defaults and say OK. Yeah? So those place names pop up. Yeah? So can we now zoom in further to something we're familiar with, like the southern part of Karnataka? Since we're here, I'm just saying that, Bangalore, around Bangalore. Yeah? Yeah. So go to that plus there, up there in the right, that icon which has the plus, the layers, add layer. That icon right there. Yeah? Yeah. How do you add the labels? So highlight that layer in the layer dialog. So highlight it, then right click. At the bottom of the menu that comes up, you'll see properties. In properties, go to labels. Go to that label dialog, yeah? And then at the top, it says no labels, choose single labels, and then just accept all the defaults and say OK. It'll bring up the names. Got it? Yeah? So have you all zoomed into the southern part of the peninsula? Yeah? So we have a polygon layer. We have a point layer. Can you open the attribute table for the point layer, please? Yeah. So you can see that there is, again, a lot of information available. You can highlight some, if you can sort these tables by clicking on the field name. So if I click on name, it sorts it alphabetically. If I click again, it will sort it alphabetically the other way around. Okay. So this is a useful way of finding records in a big database. You can sort them. Each field can be sorted by clicking on it. So you can highlight a place and then see where it comes up. Yeah, you can do the same thing we did with the polygon with the points. Okay, can I move? So now we'll bring in a arc layer, a layer of lines. We've looked at polygons and we've looked at points. I'm going to add a layer of lines. So again, in that data set, there's something called rivers_lake center lines. Can you bring that in? Choose the .shp file extension, open, and add. Okay. Yeah, and I just bought it in some random color. It's yellow, but these are actually rivers. So I want to change it to show that these are rivers. I want to show it in blue. Is everybody with me? If you need me to stop, just yell. So you right click on Rivers Lake, go to properties. You will see this thing called symbology, right? In symbology, first click here on that thing that says simple line. Okay, it'll bring up a set of tools by which you can change the way the line is depicted. You can change the width of the line, how broad the line is. We just accept the current default. Go make it some nice color of shade of blue, whichever you prefer, and say apply. Okay, and there you have it. Now, we should probably also change the colors for the cities, but we're not going to do that. So that's how you change symbology. Yeah, in QGIS, it's very easy. Again, if you like, you can open the vector attribute table, take a look at the kind of information. It has the names of all the rivers. These are just the major rivers. Yeah. Okay, so those are vectors. We've looked at a polygon, we've looked at a point, we've looked at an arc. Okay, now we're going to bring in a raster. The raster that I've shared with you is from a globally available data set called BioClim. Some of you may have heard of this in earlier lectures because it's used a lot for species niche modeling. So this temperature, its mean annual temperature, has been downloaded from the BioClim data set, and then in a GIS I have used the India boundary, the actual India boundary, to clip the raster, so you'll only see the information for within the Indian boundary, okay? So, because the other raster is very big, I didn't want to tie up your systems with it. So, go to add raster. All of you found how to add a raster? Add layers. Go to add layers, choose raster instead of vector, yeah? Here, choose raster. Then bring up this file. It's what's called a GeoTIFF format. So it's a TIFF format with georeferencing information associated with it. That's a GeoTIFF. So MAT stands for mean annual temperature. Open, add, yeah. Now in a raster, this is called grayscale. So it's assigning shades of gray values to that range of values that are available in the raster. So one way you can find out more information about this raster is go to properties, okay? Go to the top thing that says information, yeah? You can do this for vectors also, but it's usually more important to do it in the case of rasters. So you can see here, what is this information here? It says information from provider. What is this? It's pulling this from the metadata file. Can anybody guess what these are? These numbers? Yeah. Okay, there can be anything, they don't have to be in lat long, but that's the X, Y location of the top, probably the top right or the top left, I can never remember, but one corner anchoring the raster in space, that's the X, Y. And then this is the X, Y of the bottom right, usually that they give the two diagonal, okay? And so extent is how much area on the Earth's surface the raster covers. Number of rows, number of columns, okay? Width and height. Data type, it's a float, decimal. Now just, can you scroll down on this? Okay, here, this is important. Maximum value of the raster. So in this case, it's a raster on mean annual temperature. So what's the maximum value we have here? About 29.8 degrees centigrade, yeah? Mean 22.8. Minimum negative 26, interesting. Standard deviation, all of that is given, yeah? And then here you have the pixel size. This is the resolution of the raster. Why is it looking weird? Yeah. Sorry, 2 minutes. 2 minutes, yeah. Okay, so it's looking weird because it's in lat long. Yeah, so I'll wrap here for the hands-on. Sorry, I've gone into your lunch break.